We're going to talk about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Last week we talked about, which I think is maybe more important, is what he did the 24 hours prior to the assassination in San Antonio and Houston and Fort Worth. So basically where we're at now is he has left Fort Worth and he's getting on an airplane for a short flight to Dallas, and then we'll kind of go from there. Before I do that, I wanted to kind of tell you about the Dallas Police Department's preparations for President Kennedy. And this kind of goes back, obviously, before he gets here. On November 13th of 1963 is when the Dallas Police Department had been officially notified that the President was actually going to come to Dallas. And Dallas Police had also received the exact motorcade route, which I'll give you. The President would travel through downtown Dallas on his way to the Trade Mart. Okay, and the Trade Mart was a big facility that you might compare to the Casper Event Center or the Billings Metro or the Rimrock Auto Arena or whatever. Well, after they received the information that the President was coming on November 13th, the Dallas Police Department did the following precautionary measures. First of all, they made checks on all known extremist organizations and individuals in the Dallas area. We kind of talked about some of those last time. You know, Edwin Walker and the guy at the head of the John Birch Society and those types of people. Second thing they did is they assigned over 400 police officers to the Dallas detail the day that the President was going to visit. So they put 400 police officers on duty. And then Dallas Deputy Police Chief Ray Lundy made a detailed inspection of any possible hazards along the motorcade route. So they checked that all out. Well, on Saturday, December 16th, 1963 is when the Dallas newspapers published the motorcade route for the public to see. So it was a lot different than now. You'd never do that now. But in those days, they published the route so people could come out. And the President wanted people out, you know, to make kind of a big show. Well, on Wednesday evening, November 20th, the people of Dallas listened on local television to a special message from Police Chief Jesse Curry. And this is what Jesse Curry said to the people of Dallas that evening. He said, "Because of the unfortunate incident which occurred here during the visit of Ambassador Stevenson, people everywhere in the world will be hypocritical of our behavior. Nothing must occur that is disrespectful or degrading to the President of the United States. All law enforcement agencies will do everything within their power to ensure that no negative accidents or incidents occur. He is entitled to the highest respect of all of our citizens." So the issue wasn't whether he was going to be harmed physically. The issue was whether somebody was going to do something to embarrass the President, as they had done with Adlai Stevenson during UN Day. So I don't think anybody even had a clue what was going to happen or what could happen. I think the idea was they didn't want an embarrassing situation. Well then, as far as the motorcade through downtown Dallas, here's kind of, we're going to go on the timeline now. At 11:20 a.m., Air Force One left Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, and they arrived at Love Field in Dallas at 11:40, just about a 20-minute deal from getting on the airplane to touching down. As the President and Mrs. Kennedy reached the bottom of the mobile staircase from Air Force One, they were greeted by Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell and his wife, Dearie Cabell. And I have a picture of Earl. We're kind of getting into the assassination stuff. This is Earl Cabell and his wife, and they met the President and Mrs. Kennedy at the bottom of the portable staircase off the airplane. It was at this time that Mrs. Cabell presented Jackie with that large bouquet of red-stemmed roses that's so visible, you know, in the vehicle after the assassination. A wheelchair was then pushed, and I'll give you one of these. We can pass those around. A wheelchair was then pushed up to the President as he was at the bottom of the mobile staircase, and President and Mrs. Kennedy were introduced to a lady by the name of Mrs. Annie Dunbar. And Annie Dunbar was 85 years old, and you can obviously see that she was in a wheelchair at the time. And she proceeded to tell both the Kennedys that she was a loyal Democrat and never had met a president before. And President Kennedy shook her hand warmly and moved on to waiting cars in the motorcade. Now, the plan was that Mrs. Kennedy and the President were going to follow the Secret Service directly from Air Force One straight to the waiting cars in the motorcade. That was the plan because of security measures. Well, President Kennedy and Jackie instead kind of snuck off like a couple of school children towards a fence of crowded people who were waving and cheering, and you'll see this on video. And for nearly 5 minutes, they walked along the fence touching the hands of as many people as they could, and you'll again see that on video. I would assume that these lucky few would not soon forget the contact with the President and his beautiful wife, especially after the events that were going to happen shortly. Well, the presidential limousine had been flown in from Washington, D.C. Its top and windows were removed. The President, it was a nice day, it cleared up, and the President did not want the bubble top on the limousine. And I think I told you this before, the bubble top is not bulletproof, as a lot of people talk about it, but it certainly would have provided some protection, but it was not bulletproof. Well, the couple finally got into the presidential limousine and the motorcade began. And presidential protection by the Secret Service was going to be very difficult in Dallas that day for three reasons. First of all, as I mentioned, President Kennedy insisted on riding in an open convertible during the motorcade route so he could be seen. That's what he wanted. He told the agents he did not want the bubble top on. Also, because of the large crowds that were expected along the motorcade route, the President's really going to be a wide open target. And when you see the footage, you'll see there were people lying in the streets 10, 12 deep, people up in windows, you know, second, third, and fourth story buildings. And also the Secret Service, who would normally surround the President, were pulled back so people could see the President better during the parade route. He pulled them back, okay? The presidential motorcade would be extremely long, with a lead car directly in front of the presidential limousine. And this lead car is actually going to be driven by Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry, the man that got on the television and spoke to the people earlier. And there were three passengers in that lead car. Dallas County Sheriff Bill Decker was in that car. Forrest Sorrells, who was the Secret Service agent in charge of the advance team that came to Dallas and prepared the security for the President's visit, was in the lead car. And Secret Service agent Winston Lawson, who was the man responsible to plan the entire motorcade through downtown Dallas, was also in the lead car. Right behind the lead car was the presidential limousine. It was driven by Secret Service agent Bill Greer, and it contained the following 5 passengers. You had President Kennedy in the back of the limousine with Mrs. Kennedy at his side. Then you had Texas Governor John Connally and his wife. They were there also, and they occupied what they called as jump seats between the drivers and the back of the limousine. And again, Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie would occupy those 2 seats. And then Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, who was the head of the presidential detail in Dallas for President Kennedy's visit, was also in that lead car. Now I do have a nice model I'll pass around. Please be careful though. And this shows you the limousine here and exactly the positions that each of the people were in, with the Kennedys in the back, the Connollys in the middle, and the drivers in the front 2 seats. So be careful with that, but that is a pretty detailed description of what the presidential limousine looked like as it went through the motorcade. Now, between the lead car and the limousine, if you can picture this, were Dallas police officers riding on motorcycles that included James Chaney and Bobby Hargis. Okay? So again, between the lead car and the presidential motorcade were Dallas police officers on motorcycles, and it was a large group, more than, there were several in there. The names I want you to remember, James Chaney and Bobby Hargis. They were 2 of several police officers on motorcycles. Following the President's limousine was a car carrying heavily armed Secret Service agents. The code name of that car was Halfback. And in the car was Secret Service agents Clint Hill and Tim McIntyre. Both were standing on the Secret Service vehicle's running boards on the driver's side. And you can see those in pictures, and you'll get a chance to see some of those. Also in this Secret Service car were President Kennedy's closest aides, Kenneth O'Donnell and David Powers. They were both in the Secret Service vehicle as well. Well, the Secret Service vehicle was followed by a limousine that contained Vice President Johnson and his wife, and Senator Ralph Yarborough, who had said that he wouldn't ride with Johnson earlier, if you remember that. Okay? Now, from Love Field, the presidential motorcade was scheduled to follow an 11-mile route through downtown Dallas to the Trade Mart, where the President was going to give a luncheon speech. So again, from Love Field, the motorcade was scheduled to follow an 11-mile route through downtown Dallas to the Trade Mart, where the president was going to give a luncheon speech. Now I'll kind of wait till everybody gets one of those maps and you can kind of follow this a little bit. I've actually driven this route. It's kind of interesting. The motorcade route, if you can find Love Field on the handout, the motorcade route would travel down Mockingbird Lane and then hook onto Lemon Avenue and take a turn into Turtle Creek Drive and then onto Cedar Springs Road and on to Harwood Street, and then a turn onto Main Street. And once it was on Main Street, it would take 15 minutes to reach the trademark. Now, ironically, you know who lived on Turtle Creek Drive? General Edwin Walker. And you have to keep that kind of in mind because he actually kind of lived along the route. And again, once they got on Main Street, as you can see in your map, it would take about 15 minutes to reach the trademark. So now we're going to do a little bit of a timeline, tell you what happened. At 11:45 a.m., the presidential motorcade departed from Love Field towards downtown Dallas. And like I mentioned, the weather had cleared and it was a beautiful sunshiny day in Dallas. And during the motorcade route, children were seen in yellow raincoats, showing that it had been raining earlier in the day when the kids had arrived to get a spot to see the president. So if you see these videos, you'll see kids in raincoats, but it wasn't raining. At 11:50 a.m., President Kennedy halted the motorcade to greet a group of small children who were waving a sign which read, "Mr. President, please stop and shake our hands." He actually stopped the presidential motorcade and shook hands with those kids. You can't even fathom that today. Open limousine. Governor Connolly, who was in the limousine, was later quoted as saying about that, he said, "There was one little girl who was carrying the sign. He just told the driver to stop, and of course he was immediately mobbed by a bunch of youngsters." That was his comments afterwards. Well, the motorcade then continued. Then at 12 noon, President Kennedy ordered the limousine to stop again, this time to shake hands with a group of Catholic nuns that were along the route. And by now, the Secret Service agents were becoming just a little bit nervous because he had brought the motorcade to a complete stop twice. Well, the crowds in downtown Dallas were just enormous. In many places, 20 people deep, if you can imagine that, along the Main Street. In addition, people were crowding onto the street, narrowing the motorcade's ability to even maneuver from both sides. Well, this is kind of interesting to picture this in your mind. To keep the president away from the crowd, the motorcade drove on the far left of Main Street, putting Mrs. Kennedy really in harm's way because she was sitting on this side and he was sitting on this side, and they were going on the left side to keep the crowd over here away from the president. So they were very close to the crowd on the left, not so much on the right. Well, Secret Service agent Clint Hill got off the limousine on Main Street as the motorcade was preparing for highway speed to travel to the trademark. He had actually gotten on the back of the limousine on those jump handles that you saw because he was a little concerned about Mrs. Kennedy being in such close proximity to the crowd when they went to the left side. Well, when he knew they were going to get to highway speed, he jumped off and went back to the Secret Service vehicle as they were going to get to a higher speed to travel to the trademark. Well, there were people hanging out open windows, climbing on signs and statues, you'll see this, and making it virtually impossible to protect anyone from a possible sniper. In the heat of the moment during the motorcade, one Secret Service agent allegedly blurted out, "Hell, you can't keep the President of the United States in a steel box." They were very, very concerned about what was happening with the President and the fact that they're having a hard time protecting him because of the situation. Well, as the end of the 11-mile motorcade parade route, which had traveled a substantial portion of the route on Main Street, the parade headed directly toward an area known as Daley Plaza. And that's what I'm handing out to you right now is a color picture of Daley Plaza. And as soon as everybody gets one of those, we'll kind of have you understand what we're going to be doing here. So if you look at this, if you look at this overhead view here, they're coming from here. This is Main Street. This is what is a triple underpass, and this is 3 different streets here. Okay? This is Elm, this is Main, this is Commerce. And they're coming down Main, and they're going to take a right turn onto Houston and a left onto Elm, if you can picture that there. So they're actually coming between these two buildings is where they're going to be coming through in Daley Plaza. But this whole area right here, this whole area is known as Daley Plaza in Dallas. Okay? Well, when the motorcade reached Houston Street, as you can kind of follow there, it took a right, heading right toward the Texas School Book Depository, which is this building right here with the Hertz sign on top of it. That's the Texas School Book Depository. Okay? The Texas School Book Depository was a warehouse that supplied textbooks to schools across the South. At 11:29 p.m., after traveling on Houston Street for a short distance, the presidential limousine passed what we know as the Dallas County Courthouse, and that's this building here. So they've made the right, and they're right in the middle of the Dallas County Courthouse, heading toward the School Book Depository to make the turn on Elm Street. When the presidential limousine got right in the middle of the Dallas County Courthouse, Nellie Connolly turned to President Kennedy and said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." Because the concern was that he was going to be treated poorly there, and they were just thrilled to death. They had made almost the entire 11-mile route and were going to get ready to get on the Stemmons Freeway and head to the Trade Mart. They were just at the end of this route. Well, after traveling a short distance down Houston Street, the presidential motorcade made a sharp left turn right here onto Elm Street. Okay, real sharp turn. And the idea was it was going to go down Elm Street and catch the Stemmons Freeway and get on the freeway and then take off and then exit at the Trade Mart entrance, and he was going to go give his luncheon speech. Okay? Well, the motorcade had to make a 120-degree turn onto Elm Street, which slowed the presidential limousine down to approximately 11 miles per hour. And after it made that turn, it started to gain a little speed, and it headed down Elm Street towards an area right here that's known as the Grassy Knoll. The Grassy Knoll. Okay? Everybody with me so far? Well, as the presidential limousine traveled down Elm Street toward the Stemmons Freeway exit, suddenly at 12:30 p.m., 3 shots rang out in Daley Plaza. The 3 shots fired at President Kennedy's limousine would change the course of American history forever. Now, according to history, now this is the Warren Report, and I'll let you, I'm not necessarily saying I believe this is the order. We've talked about that before. I certainly believe there were 3 shots, but I'm not sure this was the order. But this is what history and history's research and investigation tells us. So according to history, the following is the order of the 3 shots fired on November 22nd, 1963 in Daley Plaza in Dallas. The first shot was fired from above and to the right of President Kennedy's limousine. Now the first bullet hit President Kennedy in the back and exited out his throat. And you can see from the Zapruder film, and even in this photograph I'm passing around, the president immediately brings both hands to his throat. Immediately brings them to his throat. And I circled, it's kind of a fuzzy picture, but I circled in that picture, you can see the president's left arm and the cuff of his shirt. It's in white, and he's got his left hand up to his neck. And I'll try to point that out to you a little better here in just a second. But this is one of the more famous pictures that was taken, and you can see the Secret Service agents. What are they doing, most of them? Turning, looking where? Behind them, right? Now if you look in this circle, this white thing is his cuff of his shirt, his suit jacket's a little bit to the right of that, and that fleshy thing is his hand. And what he's done is he's brought his left hand with his right coming up to his throat. And that was after the first shot. So that photo, that AP photo, was taken just right at the first shot. And it did enter the president's back and traveled downward through the president's body and exited out his throat. As I mentioned, President Kennedy immediately lifted both hands to the front of his neck where the bullet exited his throat, and then it entered Governor Connolly's back at the rear of the right armpit. It then continued through Governor Connolly's body, shattering his fifth rib and exiting out the right side of his chest. The bullet then struck Connolly's right wrist, shattering his radius bone, then stopped and lodged in his left thigh. That was the first shot of 3, according to the Warren Commission. According to the Warren Commission, the second shot missed the presidential limousine. It went over the top of the vehicle and hit a cement curb in front of the triple underpass. A Dallas car salesman by the name of James Tague was standing by this triple underpass directly in front of the motorcade watching the presidential parade. So if I'm James Tague, I'm looking right at we can look right at President Kennedy at that angle, and above that would be the Texas School Book Depository, where the shot went over the top of the limousine and hit a cement curb in front of James Tague. Tague, according to his testimony, felt a sting on his cheek. He was nicked in the face by either a fragment of the cement or a bullet fragment that hit the curb in front of him. He was later confronted by another man who said he had dried blood on his cheek. So the Warren Commission determined that the second shot missed and hit the curb, which minorly wounded James Tague. The third and final shot hit President Kennedy directly in the back of the head. Not being gross, blood and brains flew in every single direction. Patrolman Bobby Hargis, one of the 2 men I told you to kind of keep in mind that were on motorcycles, who had only been with the Dallas police force for 1 week, was splattered with brain matter and blood from the president's wound. Patrolman James Cheney